Hey everybody, Austin Meyer from X-Plane coming at you from X-Force PC, where my friend Mike Brown loads up computers with copies of X-Plane to ship to customers, X-Plane pre-installed. So, like many of you, I recently heard about this insane flight that SpaceX was about to fly in Texas, where they would start off on a launch pad in a rocket with a bit of fuel, blast up to like 50,000 feet, fall down like a skydiver, and then hit landing engines at just the last moment and land. And as soon as I heard about this, I was like, oh my gosh, I have got to try this in X-Plane. Because remember what X-Plane is for. It applies actual aeronautical formula to physical bodies to predict what they're going to do next in the atmosphere. It's a completely objective analysis of what an airplane is going to do. And because of that, it lets you fly a mission in the sim before it's flown in reality. That's what X-Plane is built for, right?
Hold on, Austin. Hold
yes.
on. I have to interrupt here.
Okay, so, go ahead.
So I have used this app, and it occurs to me that what you've done is you've taken going to Mars, which is a multi-step process. It's not like you just blast off, you fly to Mars, you land.
Right.
It's a multi-step process. And you've divided it into 5 different missions.
Yep.
Which ultimately, if you can fly all 5 of these missions, you could fly yourself to Mars. Now, we know the computers are going to control a lot of this.
Yep.
But what's the fun in that, right?
Right.
It's fun if you get to do it.
Of course.
But you've taken the aerospace engineering and put it in, and you've essentially proven that what Elon is trying to do with SpaceX is doable.
Right. So I applied the physics of X-Plane to Martian atmosphere, gravity, topography, and these physics, they're completely unlike all the animations, right? We've all seen tons of animations on the net where somebody says, I'm going to have a starship go through a line and then rotate, and then I'm going to add a fire effect. That's not what I do, right? I take control input from the user flying my app by tilting the iPad, apply it to physics in the simulation to then see what a physical body is going to do next when forces are acting on it, from rockets and aerodynamic drag and all that kind of stuff. And so what this app does that I'm about to unveil is prove that a mission to Mars can work. Yes, it proves
on
it with
an
math.
iPad.
Yeah, we happen to fly it on an iPad so everybody can fly it, but we all know iPads have more computing power than the entire Apollo 5 mission, right? So that really isn't even surprising anymore.
Yeah.
So what I want to talk about today is an app I wrote called X-Plane Starship. It's available on the iPad, and it's going to let you fly all of these SpaceX missions yourself. And by the time you've flown all 5 missions, you'll have a pretty good idea of what it's like to operate a SpaceX Starship. And if you can succeed in each of these missions using the real physics that X-Plane has, you'll have also proven whether the real mission to Mars that SpaceX is proposing is at least theoretically possible.
Because a lot of this, from here forward at this point, is just an idea.
Right.
This is the only part that's been done.
We've only flown, SpaceX has only actually flown mission number 1. All the other missions exist only hypothetically. And as we're recording this video, they're still fueling up the rockets and testing the engines for mission number 2.
But you can fly it
right now.
Before they do it.
You can fly it before they do it, right now in the simulator. So it's called X-Plane Starship. It's on the App Store, iOS App Store. It's free. And I guess what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through each mission one at a time, and we're going to start with mission number 1. This is a recreation of a flight that SpaceX has already actually flown in this airplane. And the way it worked is they took off from like a takeoff pad, translated over a bit, and then landed. How does this airplane steer itself when it's got the main engines running and hover? How does it work?
Well, the engine is mounted on a gimbal.
Yep, and?
It vectors the thrust.
Exactly. So the gimbal vectors the thrust to move the airplane like this. It's not exactly like a seal balancing a broom on its nose for various reasons, but it's kind of similar in that the thrust moves one way and then the rocket initially moves the opposite way and then takes off. And so when you're flying mission number 1, as you tilt the iPad to tilt the rocket away from you or tilt the rocket back towards you or tilt left or tilt right, you are going to be driving that thrust vector down here like this to maneuver the rocket. So Mike, you flew this mission. How did you do with it?
I did okay. It took me a couple of tries to get it right, and I kind of went around in a circle a couple of times.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The hard part is anticipating in advance enough to not find yourself always chasing around in a circle. Yeah, no question, that's the hard part.
That's exactly what I did.
Okay, so did you notice how many engines were running for this test?
Looked like one to me.
Yeah, exactly. There's 3 sea level engines and 3 vacuum engines in this rocket. It's a 6-engine rocket, but it only hovers with 1 engine. Do you know why that is?
Well, the obvious answer is because that's all it needs.
Sure.
But there's a more technical answer, I'm sure.
Yeah, and here it is. The engines on this thing can only be throttled between 40% and 100%. Now, you obviously drive your ridiculous Dodge Demon Hellcat Viper. What is your car called again?
Hellcat Red Eye.
Hellcat Red Eye. And what would happen with your Hellcat Red Eye if every time you put that thing into gear, you had to be between 40% and 100% throttle? How would that go for you?
I wouldn't last very long.
No, you wouldn't last through your first drive. These rocket engines are kind of the same. They run 500,000 pounds of thrust, and they can only throttle between 40 and 100%. So if you put too many engines on this thing, it ain't going to hover, because 40% is your minimum throttle, up you'll go. So this thing hovers with only 1 out of 3 engines running. Now, let's talk about why. Do you remember why exactly you cannot go below 40% throttle? What happens?
Well, yes, from your previous takes, I happen to know that if you run it below 40%, that air, sort of like those blue arrows, kind of gets into the nozzle and causes it to be ineffective. Right, exactly. So what happens is the way flow works in a nozzle is it's supersonic. As the nozzle expands out, the air goes faster and goes to lower pressure. Pressure comes down too much, then air from the atmosphere starts leaking in and destabilizing the flow around the exit. And so you have to keep this nozzle filled with expanding air, expanding fuel at a certain rate to keep that air from leaking in. 40% of maximum is the minimum that you can dump into the system without air leaking around back from behind. So this thing hovers at 70% throttle, which is perfect to let you take off, translate over, and land on the destination pad. Okay, now let's talk mission number 2. So Mike, you remember like a year ago, I had like a cylinder out of the roof of my wife's Tesla going down the street and measuring the aerodynamic center of the cylinder. Do you remember what I found from that about where the center of pressure lies on a cylinder? Well, the center of pressure, I think, was in the middle of the thing.
No.
Wasn't in the middle?
When you're running this way, when you're going straight into the air, the center of pressure is 25% of the way back from the leading edge.
And it caused it to spin around.
Which caused it to spin around. So let's say we're going this way. The center of pressure is at 25% of the body length back, which causes it to spin like this. Now, as we're going this way with the center of gravity in the middle of the airplane, what happens next?
Well, the center of pressure is now towards the back, and it's going to spin back around
again. Which is spin back around. And then where is it going to wind up in equilibrium?
Well, eventually sideways.
Exactly, eventually sideways. So in other words, the center of pressure is always like the 25% body length, which will spin the nose back. Well, that has the center of pressure of the 25% body length here, which wants to spin it back. And then it eventually is just going to wind up at a 90-degree angle. If the center of gravity is at the center of the vehicle, or the test flight where it's connected to a spinning rod, it's going to wind up stable at a 90-degree angle. Because that's where the center of pressure and the center of gravity are the same point. So in other words, it's going to wind up wanting to move through the air like this. Now, if we put some little fins on here, and the fins have, say, a 45-degree dihedral coming up like this, then it's going to want to wind up like this attitude as it moves, because it's acting like a shuttlecock. You see? You know how like a badminton or a shuttlecock, it always wants to have the fins kind of trailing behind it. Same thing here if you have a 45-degree dihedral. And so this is the natural attitude the vehicle wants to take if it's going in this direction. Now, let's talk about mission number 2, the crazy test flight that's about to happen in Texas. We start off on the pad, engage the engines, and up we go. Now, here's my first question for you. Why doesn't it put its belly to the airflow immediately and go to a 90-degree angle of attack during the launch?
Well, I would assume that the computers on board are ensuring that it stays straight by using the vector thrust?
Exactly. So as you're going up, that thrust is constantly making tiny corrections you can't even see to hold the nose pointed straight up, because it's not naturally what the rocket wants to do. Then, when the rocket engines shut down and the thing is still moving upwards, what's the rocket going to do next?
Well, then it's going to start to take a natural tendency to roll over.
Exactly. It's going to go belly up like this because it wants to go belly into the air naturally. Once that happens, it's going to peak out around 40 or 50,000 feet, and it's going to start to come down, and it's going to naturally want to assume the attitude of a skydiver. And at some point, you're going to start descending in a level attitude, and you're going to realize what you need to do is get back over to your landing pad. If you want to lower the nose, fold up the wings in front, and the nose will come down. If you want to lower the tail, fold up the wings in back, the tail will come down. Same for roll and for yaw. You can always just move your wings in one direction or another to maneuver the craft. And at this point, you're not in a rocket so much as an airplane. You can actually glide like this back towards your launch pad like an airplane. And then what should you do as you start getting close to your takeoff point here?
Well, you want to raise the nose.
Right, exactly.
And go pull back so you can almost try to stall yourself, essentially.
Yeah, it'll feel like a stall in an airplane. Tilt the pad back towards you, raise that nose. Actually, you are going to stall the wings. I mean, you're going to a 90 degree, you are stalled. Yeah. And so get the thing stalled, and then it's going to come down vertically. And then when you're just above the ground, what do?
Engage your landing engine.
Engage the landing raptors. And there we go, and it'll tail sit. Now, why do we let it get as low and slow as we possibly can before we engage those landing raptors?
Well, the air is thicker lower. Also, the lower it is, the less the engines have to run. And then the slower you're going, the less the engines have to run.
Right. The goal is to have the engines run as little as possible for the landing to use the smallest possible amount of fuel. Therefore, you want to go as low and slow as you can with air. The way to go as low and slow as you can with air is to maximize the drag and descend to the lowest possible altitude. And so that's exactly what it does.
It's equivalent of a skydiver waiting to the last minute to throw his chute.
Right, because let's say he wanted to use his parachute for the smallest possible amount of time. Right, we want to run the engines on this for the smallest possible amount of time.
Parachute's only good for 30 seconds.
Yeah, if you've only got 30 seconds of parachute, you have to wait until the last second to pull the cord. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Imagine your parachute only works for 30 seconds. You wait until you're low. And if you're smart, you're going to slow yourself down as much as you can with your arms and legs, right? To get the thing as slow as possible if you've only got 30 seconds of parachute use. That's exactly what it is. All right, now, there's tons of renderings all over the internet about this. And all of the renderings. Yes, renderings.
Not simulations.
Yes, I did a flight simulation. Other people do renderings. But there's tons of renderings. And all the renderings that show this happening show it landing by firing up all 3 engines and then tail sitting with all 3 engines running. But as we found in mission 1, this thing bears its own weight with 1 engine at 70% throttle, which is right in the middle of the throttleable range. So my bet, I'm placing a bet here, my bet is that in reality, they're going to land with 1 engine, even though all the renderings show it landing with 3 engines. Because 1 engine is what lets you establish a nice, good, single engine, 70% throttle, which is just right to settle this thing down at 1G. Do you want to take me up on the bet, by the way?
I think you're going to be close, but I think there'll be some variation of that. But it probably is the most efficient way, but it's also maybe sort of difficult, because if you're coming down too fast, that 1 engine isn't enough, and you end up putting your butt into the ground too fast.
Exactly. So that's the trick. If you've only got 1 engine running and you wait too late to engage it, you're still going to have a high vertical speed when you plant your butt into the ground. And that 1 engine, even 100% throttle, won't be able to stop you. You have to engage that engine in time, because you're going to be running that engine around 70% to hover. You've only got 30% more for deceleration. So you need to engage it soon enough that 1 engine gets you stopped. So that's mission number 2. SpaceX is going to fly it for real. You can fly it now on your iPad. All right, now let's go to mission number 3. This is where we're going to go to Mars. Let's back up for just a second, Mike. Why are we doing this thing in Texas? Why are we trying to see how much we can slow this thing down in the air?
Well, one would have to assume that this is going to occur on Mars in some capacity, and so they can take the math from Earth and run it through an equation for Mars gravity and Mars air density and figure out how it will behave on Mars.
Exactly. This is a dress rehearsal with different gravity and air density than what we're going to see on Mars. When this thing lands on Mars, as you can do in mission number 3, the goal is to get the rocket as low and slow as possible using air so that you're as close to the surface and as close to stop as possible, so you have just a minimum amount of deceleration and landing that you do with fuel. That's to let you have the minimum duration possible landing burn and use the minimum possible amount of fuel for landing if you slow it down as much as possible first with air. So some people are arguing on the internet. They're saying, oh no, it's going to slow down with air. And other people say, oh no, it's going to slow down with rockets. Well, it's obviously going to do both. The only question is how much of each will there be? And the more you can slow down with air, the less you have to slow down with fuel.
And you take the free deceleration over the fuel deceleration first.
Exactly. I'll slow down with air, which doesn't cost me any fuel. And SpaceX claims that they can dissipate 90% of their speed in the Martian atmosphere, which is 99% of the kinetic energy. And as I've flown this in the sim, I found exactly the same answer. I can get rid of exactly 90% of my speed with air, which is 99% of my kinetic energy, leaving me only to lose the last 10% of my speed or 1% of my kinetic energy with fuel for the landing like this. So when you fly mission number 3, I'm going to start you off in the atmosphere. And if you were to say lower the nose like this, you'd have almost no drag. You would have a drag coefficient of 0.3. And, but if you can go to it at a 90-degree angle to the flow, which I guess from a cross-section standpoint looks like this, you'll have your rocket will have a coefficient drag of 1.1, which is 4 times the drag coefficient. And as you may remember from the previous takes we've had on this video, it's not just the drag coefficient, it's how much your frontal area is. Like, example, this is what the air sees. What I'm showing to the camera right now is what the air sees. There's almost no rocket when it's coming straight at you. It's very little frontal area. But now there's a lot of frontal area when I'm coming at you. And so when the rocket is doing this instead of this, not only is it a higher drag coefficient, 1.1 instead of 0.3, but it's also maybe 8 times the area exposed. And what did you find out from a ratio standpoint here?
Well, you've got 4 times the drag coefficient, and then you've got 8 times the area, so you multiply those for a total of 32 times the amount of drag.
Exactly. And you can see the equation right here, and even though you figured that out on your own, the drag coefficient is figured out by other people many years ago. Drag equals coefficient of drag times the area, the frontal area, times the airspeed squared times air density divided by 2. This is the formula for drag. And so as you figured out, not only do you have 4 times the drag coefficient when you go through the air sideways, but you have maybe 8 times the area or 5 times the area. You multiply those two to get the total drag increase. So when you're on Mars, you can, if you want, kind of lower the nose a bit like this. So you got lift and some drag, and this will let you kind of cruise along on Mars at a low altitude and kind of low speed. Or you can pop it up like this, again steering with the iPad, in which case you don't have any lift, but you got a lot more drag. And you might say, well, do I want lift or drag? Well, you want drag to slow down, but you might want lift to keep you from hitting the ground to give you more time to slow down. And so it's up to you to kind of play with it to see how low and slow can I get before I'm about to hit the dirt. And I can get it down to less than 2,000 kilometers per hour, which is
And what's the
close.
number you start with? You haven't mentioned that.
Oh, maybe 3,000 kilometers per hour. So in other words, on mission 3, I start you at a pretty low speed and altitude, so you can just kind of get that nose up, get it slowed down, kind of see how it handles.
But in reality, when this thing enters the atmosphere, it's a way higher number than that.
Which takes us to mission number 4.
That's a good segue.
Yep, so we've segued to mission number 4. So orbital speed around Mars is 13,000 kilometers per hour. If you go that fast, your centrifugal acceleration pulls you out as much as gravity pulls you in. You stay in a perfectly circular orbit. Now, as the aircraft is coming at Mars from Earth, the speed is going to be, unfortunately for us, 26,000 kilometers per hour. That's twice orbital speed. And what will happen as we're going towards Mars at 26,000 kilometers per hour, which is how fast this rocket will approach Mars. You have no choice in that because the gravity of Mars is going to pull us to Mars that quick, whether you like it or not.
For how long is it going to be traveling at that speed?
It's going to be building up to 26,000 kilometers per hour over the course of 6 months.
Yeah, 6 months.
Over 6 months, it will build up 26,000 kilometers per hour as Mars tugs on it with its gravity. This is how fast we're going when we hit Mars. Doesn't matter whether we like it or not. It's how fast we're going. Gravity says so. And when we get to this planet going 26,000 kilometers per hour, if we don't do anything about it, the gravity of Mars will bend our flight path around ever so slightly, and then we'll head on off in a new direction in a vector that gets infinitely close to a straight line over an infinite period of time. And this shape is called a hyperbola. And what's interesting about this hyperbola is our flight path will be bent, go to a new flight path, they'll go out into deep space forever. It's not an elliptical orbit. It doesn't come back. If we don't find a way to shed 26,000 kilometers per hour, we're going to go into deep space forever.
And the astronauts will be mummies at some point.
At some point in deep space. In deep space. Yep. So we have to find a way to get rid of this speed. We certainly need to get below 13,000 kilometers per hour if we want the mission to end on Mars. So how do we get rid of that speed? And as I think you've already kind of guessed, with a little bit of an atmosphere here around Mars, it's time for us to take what we've learned in mission 1 and 2.
So mission 4, we've got to try to get to mission 3, and in mission 3, we got to try to get to mission 2, and mission 2, we got to try to get to mission 1.
That's it. That's it. Exactly. And so what you're going to want to do is when you're coming into Mars at 26,000 kilometers per hour, let's say you don't want to have too much force on the airplane. You kind of want to lower the nose to kind of go for this, configuration. You don't want to have so much, load on the plane. So you kind of bring it like this. What's going to happen?
Well, you're liable to bounce off the atmosphere and continue on.
Exactly. The lift from the rocket will just pull you right up out of the atmosphere, and
because remember, there's no lift in space. You won't hit that lift until you hit the atmosphere, and suddenly you're like, whoa, I just got all this lift.
And then off into space you go in just a different hyperbolic vector. What you need to do is maximize your drag and have no lift. And so to do that, you get the vehicle at a 90-degree angle.
And then once you get down to 3,000 kilometers per hour, you're in mission 3, basically.
Yeah, and you're winning if you're as low as possible at as low a speed as possible before you have to hit the landing Raptors button. Because that's what's going to give you the minimum fuel burn, the minimum time spent under the rocket engines. Okay, now here's a really interesting thing about mission number 4. All right, so Mike, have you ever seen when the astronauts come back from the International Space Station? Have you ever seen what kind of shape they're in when they come back?
I haven't actually seen, but I can imagine that after being in 0G for a while, being all of a sudden in 1G is just got to make you pretty wobbly.
Yeah, well, they're kind of like this, like, oh, it's great to be back on Earth. Yeah, so nice to see Earth again. And they're like being carried around, right? They got this big, huge smile on their face while they're being like carried around, like this on a lazy boy chair. They can't stand up. They can't even think about it. Because once your body has been in space in 0G for all those months, coming back to 1G on Earth, it feels like you can't even move anymore.
So going from 0 to 1G after a couple of months is pretty traumatic.
Traumatic and debilitating. All right, now let's talk about mission number 4. When you come into that atmosphere at 26,000 kilometers per hour and start slowing down with air, do you know how many G's you pull from that deceleration?
Well, from a previous screw-up take of yours, I happen to know it's 5 Gs.
Exactly.
So if 1G renders an astronaut, useless,
right,
what is 5 Gs going to do for an astronaut?
Right. So in other words, when this Starship is coming from Earth, the astronauts will have been weightless for 6 or 7 months.
Wow.
They're going to go to 5 Gs almost instantly for several minutes during this deceleration. During that time period, it is my bet that the astronauts will be not even close to being able to function in any capacity at all. And so after a 6-month trip, it's going to come down to this 5-minute deceleration in the atmosphere at 5 Gs, and at that moment, no human can function. It's going to be completely up to the computers to handle anything that happens, no matter what it is. There will be no human intervention during those several minutes.
I mean, that's just mind-boggling. 0 Gs for 6 months, and you suddenly go to 5 Gs.
Yeah.
How many times more G's is that?
Yeah, infinity more. Infinity.
That's now, 5 divided by 0,
yeah,
which we know is undefined.
Now, let me just point out something here. They're going to send multiple starships. Let me tell you what my idea is, and I have not heard this batted around in the media. What if, just pretend this is a starship. I've only got one 3D printed model, sorry. What if 2 of them went, and they hooked up to each other with a cable, and they rotated around each other like this on a cable all the way to Mars? They could be under 1G for the entire trip, you see? Spin them around on a cable like this. The cost would be almost 0, right? Your cost would be a steel cable connecting one ship to another. There's no cost, there's no fuel. You probably want to send 2 starships anyway. So why not have a little cable connected and give them some spin? You can be under 1G of gravity for the entire trip. Doesn't cost you a dime, hardly. That's what I think they should do, because then at least they arrive for this 5G re-entry with their bodies acclimated to at least 1G.
That is a thought.
Yeah. I hope they do it.
You have to have a counterbalance. I mean, it wouldn't have to be...
Yeah, counterbalances the other ship.
It wouldn't have to be another ship, but the only reason... Well, then it would have to be because you couldn't carry a counterbalance heavy enough.
And you're going to send multiple ships anyway, so you might as well put them on tethers and let them orbit around each other on the way there at exactly 1G. Easiest thing to do, I think. So that's what I would do, and hopefully they will do it. But I've never heard it mentioned in the media that they would, for whatever reason. So we'll see. Yeah,
because it would make the astronauts much more healthy when they get there. They wouldn't be so weak.
Exactly. Yeah. And that includes the re-entry, the Mars exploration, the return, and just all around human health and well-being. And so this is mission number 4. And one of the things that kind of impressed on me as I've flown it is that the word challenge was dreamed up by someone sitting here on planet Earth, surrounded by air he could breathe, thick enough he could breathe, gravity, not being irradiated by radiation, not going through the atmosphere at 26,000 kilometers per hour. He could actually take another breath or walk across the room and live, as he invented the word challenge. None of those things apply on Mars. The challenge is simply like beyond anything humanity has ever faced. It's just a whole new level of challenge. And I've started to get a sense of that as I've flown mission number 4 in the simulator. And so that concludes mission number 4, where we'll use the last of our fuel for landing. And now it's time to move on to mission number 5.
Whoa. Hold on.
What?
You said you just used the last of your fuel
for landing.
Mission 4.
Yeah, for landing.
Okay, that sounds like a suicide mission.
What?
I know I'm not going to Mars if that's the parameters. How are you getting more fuel?
Oh, it's easy. So here's the deal. Martian atmosphere is made up almost entirely, 95% CO2. And this ship is powered by methane engines, which is made of CH4. That's methane. And so all we do is convert the CO2 to CH4 to refuel the ship from Martian atmosphere.
Where do you get the hydrogen from? Is that magic?
You have to bring that from Earth, apparently. Either by bringing the hydrogen with you from Earth, or maybe you can extract it from water if you have a nuclear reactor or something like that. You can fuel up with CH4 on the planet Mars. Okay, and so you're going to have a full tank of methane for this mission. This is a chemical transaction that has been done and tried many times.
Okay.
Got it. Okay.
All right.
So once you got a full tank of methane, your goal is to take off and fly into orbit. Now, this ship, when it's full of methane, is nothing like the ship you've flown in the previous missions. You haven't flown this thing with a full tank of gas yet. Now, it's full of fuel. And the ship is just an absolute pig when it's completely full of liquid methane, and it is going to be so slow and heavy. It's basically, imagine the difference between a beer can that's empty and a beer can that's full. Imagine the weight difference between those two things. Throw an empty beer can and see what happens with it, and then throw a full beer can and see what happens with that. The inertia is just completely different. They're two completely different things. And so this ship now full of fuel is going to be much heavier and more sluggish than anything you're used to. I hit the time acceleration button just to get that takeoff happening in a reasonable time period. So, going ahead, blast off from Mars, and your mission is to make orbit. Mike, how do you make orbit? What do you think you do?
Well, obviously you start out vertically, and then I would say at some point you have to start to rotate horizontally. And you got to get up to obviously 13,000 kilometers per hour. And according to your little diagram, that's at 100 kilometers of altitude.
And you better have 0 meter per second vertical speed when you do it.
Right.
No good if you're going up or down. You have to be going around, which is 0 meters per second vertical speed. So once you can do that, you can get the ship into orbit. What you can do is turn on the little reaction control system, little button on the right, point the nose off in some direction you want the airplane to go, hit those rocket engines for just a few moments, and power off into a new orbit. Then, whenever you want, flip the tail around to point in the direction you're going, engage the landing Raptors to slow down, and repeat mission 4 to come land at some new place on Mars. So in other words, if you can handle the orbital mechanics, you have the ability to travel anywhere on Mars.
Okay, so Austin, right. I have a pretty obvious question here. You know, there's not much of use on Mars. Okay, you've mentioned there's some methane. I know there's some red dirt there.
Oh, red dirt. Lots of red dirt.
It's very cold. you know, we can't, let's just say there was tons of oil, there'd be no way to bring the oil back to Earth.
We don't want to burn oil here anyway. It's a disaster.
So, I mean, why in the world do we want to go to Mars? What's the point? It's uninhabitable. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It seems like a big waste.
Okay, exactly. And so that to me is like kind of the fundamental question hiding behind all of this, which is why the heck would you do it? And my answer is a little different from other people's answer on why we would do this. And here's my answer. On Mars, it has 1% of the atmosphere that Earth does, and 40% of the gravity. That makes it so much easier to launch a rocket on Mars than it does from Earth that it's ridiculous. It's way easier to launch from Mars than from Earth. Next, Mars is out farther from the sun than the Earth is. And so if you want to take a trip to Alpha Centauri, the nearest star, which is an undertaking that makes the trip to Mars look like nothing, by the way. But if you did want to try and find a way to get to Alpha Centauri, then by starting from Mars, you're escaping from less gravity on the planet, less atmosphere, you're farther out of the gravity well of the sun, and so a trip to Alpha Centauri, which is the next just incredible leap for humanity, would be way, way easier from Mars than from Earth.
So what you're proposing is Elon is going to come up with the first step to Alpha Centauri, but it's going to require another person after him, most likely, to take step number 2. And that might even involve another little lily pad that you leap to.
Right. It may turn out that there's a really good way to launch from the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, the rings of Saturn. So basically, getting to Alpha Centauri from Earth is sort of like a little tadpole.
First lily pad, right? Yeah. You're trying to hop, the frog's trying to hop across the pond, and it's the first little lily pad, but it's easier. Every lily pad you get to, it's easier to get to the last one.
To the next one, yep. So I guess I view this as the first little stepping stone to going to another star. I don't see that last stepping stone as happening in our lifetimes, but we can take the step to Mars in our lifetimes. And that's why I'm excited to see this mission succeed.